Hello and welcome to another episode of the Contract Warrior podcast. In this episode, we're going to talk about contractor expectations versus government intent. I'm your host, Christopher Williams. I am a former contracting officer of 17 years with NAVPAC, with Cradle to Grave Contracting, with both A&E, construction, services, REAs, claims, you name it. Before we move forward, I just want to let you know about that training. If you want to learn how to think like a KO and know what the KO expects, head over to thinklikeyourko.com. Pick up that free training. It's right there. It's ready for you as you listen to this now. Go over there, get it for free, and you're good to go. So let's talk about contractor expectations versus government intent. Contractor expectations, this topic in general, I could do many episodes just on contractor expectations because it's really scenario based, right? But let's try to stay at the 30,000 foot level between both the contractor's expectations and in comparison to the government's intent. So that 30,000 foot level will be in association with pre-award and post-award. In post-award, the contractor executes with quality control in mind, not quality assurance. In pre-award, the government team is more quality control because it's their solicitation and their scope of work, and the contractor is more quality assurance in terms of making sure it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, and if it doesn't, I have questions because I know in post-award, when I'm executing quality control, I'll be held accountable for any assumptions I made in pre-award, right? So you're dialing in your expectations in pre-award so that in post-award, government intent is already identified. So in pre-award, you're going to ensure if there's any escorting in this location, that is a question you put forward. You're going to have to list everything that you can think of when it comes to that degree of a project in that location. I've always advised contractors to have a short list of questions for each procurement, given the location, the complexity, and so on and so forth, and just send them in routinely. There's never been a procurement that has been dissolved because it has received too many questions in pre-award. There have been procurements that have come to a standstill because the feedback from the contractor triggered higher dollar value and caused the government to have to recalibrate their scope of work. Yes, and that's absolutely important, right? That's a very, very, very important deal because I may not have the money to pay for the contract when the government missed the boat when they tried to identify what the scope of work was. And the contractor, doing their due diligence, captured this and that. Turns out the government needs to rewrite the scope and recalibrate what this is going to cost and on and on and on. And that's what's supposed to happen. And so between the contractor's expectations and the government intent, let's just say it gets dialed in pre-award. And then in post-award, the contractor should expect to be supported and the government intent is already identified in the contract because all those Q&A questions are part of an amendment, and the amendment is part of the solicitation, which is incorporated in the contract award, right? So the concern might be, well, why is it that the contractor has to take the lead on ensuring that everything's tight, that everything's up and up? There are numerous pros and cons for your position as a federal contractor, particularly under a firm fixed price contract, because it is your profit to gain and your profit to lose. And in a competitive environment, most importantly, you have to compete with other federal contractors. And so automatically the government is not good at quality control. Everybody who's worked a federal contract knows the government does not execute quality control very well. In fact, on design bid builds, where there's a design in the solicitation and you're simply proposing to do the construction, there's generally a designer of record that's on retainer with the federal government to help execute that quality control from a design standpoint. The government just does not do quality control very well. It's not that they can't do it, it's they don't do it very well. So, unfortunately, and ultimately, is placed on the contractor to be diligent in pre-award, and then it will pay off in post-award. It's been my experience, this is exactly what ends up being the case. Then when there's an unforeseen, the contractor is able to demonstrate to the KO how they couldn't reasonably anticipate this type of environment, right? Because they did their due diligence in pre-award. And so all too often, the contractor's expectations will flush out the government's intent in pre-award. I've seen that as a contracting officer over and over and over again. Now, when we get into post-award and the intent of whatever it is that we were trying to build comes into question, it's much easier administratively to backpedal and look at the documentation in order to identify our path forward. And that backpedaling would be review of pre-award. Now, there are occasions where something might come up in post-award that was absolutely overlooked by the contractor in pre-award, and depending on the example, other layers of oversight that are part of the equation to resolve the issue, whether we end up with a change order or it should have been understood by a prudent contractor, given access to the facility in pre-award, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of variables at play in order to mitigate a difference in government intent and contractor's expectation. I didn't want to explain this in the sense that, well, a contractor might want an escort, so they're going to ask and they're going to have one in post-award. There's much more depth to this because there's much more involved in terms of the daisy chain effect. So the reality is pre-award will establish government intent, and then post-award will execute those assumptions based on that proposal and based on those questions. And so the contract includes the solicitation, the proposal, and the design. That's what the contract is. And so your efforts in pre-award are absolutely part of your efforts in post-award. So government intent, if it's confusing in post-award, somebody missed the boat in pre-award. It could either be the contractor or the government, depending on the answers, right? But pre-award is so instrumental in identifying those expectations versus intent because it allows both sides to mediate post-award concerns. So I hope that's clear. I hope that's helpful. And just know, yes, there's an obvious difference between the expectations of the contractor and the intent of the government. But I've always leveraged that pre-award cycle in order to capture all of that, at least 90%, so that when we get into execution, we can navigate any type of unknowns, right? None of us have a crystal ball, but we're on common ground by the time we make the award. And in a competitive environment, the contracting officer sees the price outcome, right, among all the competitive contractors and makes a decision based on price analysis to make an award. And so there's a process that's involved that dials in the confidence of that contract award. It's not just done because we crossed the line and we can just award it now that we've checked the boxes. There's actually other parts that are applicable from the contracting officer standpoint before the award is executed. But irregardless, the bottom line is pre-award is important for the contractor to dial in that quality control role with their questions in support of the solicitation and the pre-proposal conference or the job walk and what they've experienced and the concerns they have with their subcontractors and so forth. Do not ever feel like you need to restrain yourself when it comes to the volume of questions that you ask in pre-award. You can ask as many and whatever you want when it comes to pre-award. The issue becomes a problem when there's contractors are holding back. That becomes a big problem, and that's discovered in post-award. It's really not complicated, and yet a lot of heavy lifting happens in pre-award, and unfortunately, I have seen it where pre-award is disregarded. It's not considered because it looks like a low complexity project. It's not a big deal. And sometimes that's true. But when we're executing post-award and common sense things pop up, and it could have been foreseen by the contractor, it doesn't always go the contractor's way where there's going to be a change order. You might be stuck with the scope as is because a prudent contractor could have anticipated this type of work. And that's just how it is when it comes to a firm fixed price contract. And with that said, if you want to submit better RFIs or learn how to do that, absolutely check out that training, Think Like Your KO. Just head on over to thinklikeyourko.com and it's free, right? And I walk you through how to submit legitimate RFIs and the authority behind it, what is happening, and where you're going, why you're doing that. And then there's a course that goes with it, and along with a few bonus trainings as well, if you're interested in getting access to that information. If you have any feedback for this episode, please give me that feedback at contractorko.com. I look forward to seeing any comments or any feedback. If you have any questions, I might use some of those on future episodes. And until next time, we'll see you on the next episode.